It's one thing to listen to doom and gloom about food and fertilizer shortages, skyrocketing prices, the cost of living, or your job being outsourced overseas or eliminated due to automation. It's quite another thing to hear practical, immediately actionable advice from experts who can help you reduce the fear, anxiety, and burden of these problems. Tune in now to the Surviving Hard Times podcast from the Finding Genius Foundation with Richard Jacobs. Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. I'm Richard Jacobs, Executive Director of the nonprofit Finding Genius Foundation and host of the Finding Genius podcast. In late 2016, I was rear-ended at 65 miles an hour by a truck on the highway, which sent me off-road into a ditch. The impact of the collision gave me a concussion and other injuries. At the hospital, a CT scan showed that I had thyroid nodules, which turned out to be cancer. It was then, when I had a biopsy of my neck, that I realized even if I was a millionaire, I wouldn't want a second or a third biopsy due to the pain and the invasiveness of it. And appointments at that time for thyroid experts were 3 to 6 months out, and I was worried about dying now, even if that was irrational. So because of this, I've decided to raise money to conduct a literature review on steroids, on the causes of anxiety and depression, a condition that affects well over 50 million people in the United States and hundreds of millions worldwide. Our goal is to create a codex, a guide that reveals all possible treatments for anxiety and depression for people that live with the condition, or for loved ones that have it, as my wife and my son do. To find out more about our fundraiser, visit findinggeniusfoundation.org and click on Current Initiatives. And now, to our guest. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Surviving Hard Times podcast, sponsored by the Finding Genius Foundation.
I have Angelos Deltsidis, PhD. He's an assistant professor in post-harvest physiology at the Department of Horticulture at on the Tifton campus at University of Georgia. So we're going to talk about what's called post-harvest fruit and vegetable physiology. Interesting. Angelos, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, besides rotting, what happens to fruits and vegetables once they're harvested? Like, what are some of the physiological things that go on?
Great question. So many people don't know that, but when you cut a vegetable or a fruit from the mother plant, it still continues to live. It's an alive organism, and as all live organisms, it'll eventually die. So what we're trying to do here, and where we come as post-harvest physiologists, is we're trying to slow down the process, the senescence process, and make it last as long as possible with a better quality, good, flavor, aroma, good visual appearance. And we try to extend the shelf life to make sure it gets to the final consumer.
Yeah, I'm very interested in what happens to the profile of all the chemicals that comprise fruits and vegetables, the nutrients and things like that. Do they go down quickly? Like, how important is freshness if you're going to eat something?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. It depends. Some things decline considerably after harvest. Some others don't do as much. And some others go up, actually. So just to give you an idea, there are fruit out there that, when you cut them from the plant, they're not ready to be eaten yet. But because they have a natural ability to ripen after harvest, they will accumulate sugars and they will become sweeter without us giving them anything, but just allowing nature to do its work. A good example is bananas. Bananas are harvested green from the tropical areas of the world, and then they're shipped to us using containers and boats, and they come to ports of entry, could be Miami or Savannah or LA, and they're green. And then they are distributed throughout the country, and they get to grocery stores, and then they can artificially aid them to ripen. They turn from green to yellow by applying an ethylene hormone, as we call it. It's just like a gaseous hormone that will be synthesized on its own, but we're doing it faster by applying it to the load. So, you get a green banana. It's, produced in Ecuador. You live in Iowa, and, it'll get to you at the exact same stage as someone in LA or someone in New York or someone in Europe will get it. This is because of what we can do. We stop the ripening process when we want it to be slow, and we make it faster and uniform when we want it to be a ripe product, in the point we want it to be ripe.
Okay, yeah, because I had heard you put bananas in like a paper bag, and the ethylene will get trapped enough to ripen them. And I don't know,
Exactly.
are there other fruits that you could put next to bananas to help them ripen, or the ethylene not affect them?
So that's a good question. There are many fruit that will produce ethylene, and you can put them in the bag or nearby bananas. Apples are good ethylene producers, and many tropical fruit like the cherry moyas, these are produce a lot of ethylene.
Companion fruits that can help you ripen stuff?
Yes, there is a lot. There's a lot of them, and not all of them produce the same amount. As I said, these tropical fruit produce more than others, but you can go online and look up ethylene producing fruit, and you will find a list. But usually, honestly, if you leave, let's say, a banana out on its own, or you put it in a paper bag, high temperature and nature will do its trick. It might be slower, but it'll still happen, on its own. Applying ethylene, from another source will make it faster, but it can happen on its own. And what's great about ethylene is that it can be active in very small amounts. You don't need a lot of it. So, even the product on its own will produce enough ethylene eventually to ripen the fruit.
Why do fruits produce it? What's the role? What's the purpose?
It's just part of the ripening process, and it's produced naturally as a step in the ripening process to allow the fruit turn from an immature fruit, it becomes mature, then it's able to produce ethylene, and it can accumulate sugars and all these great flavors and aromas that we want to, in order for it to be consumed. Some of the examples of ethylene producers, as I said, apples, bananas, melons, pears, peaches, they all produce quite a bit amount of ethylene. Tomatoes, which is a fruit, even if it, in our mind, it's a vegetable, does produce a little bit of ethylene. And there are other products that, do not produce any ethylene or produce very little. But if you put them close to ethylene, they're very sensitive to it. And you're going to see the effects of ethylene, usually something that is not desired. I'll give you an example. You get broccoli, let's say. You put it close to an ethylene producer, and you get yellowing, and you get this visual effect of an old broccoli. So ethylene at high temperature will cause your broccoli to turn from green to yellow, and will cause the florets to be, all looking old and not, pleasant to be consumed anymore.
All right. So do stores or certain distributors have machines that'll, produce ethylene to ripen stuff? Like let's say I'm a fruit and vegetable distributor, and I get like 10 different kinds of each, and I have to deliver it to local stores. Do I bother to ripen anything before I deliver it, or no?
Yes. So many crops, actually, let me rephrase that. We do use it in a number of crops. We use ethylene in bananas for sure, and we can use it also in avocados. Other crops, usually we're trying to avoid them ripening too fast. So, for apples, for example, we want them to store for a long time. Or for pears, we want them, firm for a long time. You can apply ethylene exogenously and have the ripening process, happen faster. But bananas and avocados are the two main ones that are ripened with ethylene for now. If we go to tomatoes, that is also, a fruit vegetable, as we call it, we can apply ethylene there too, and it's happening routinely. Bananas are, if you know that they're harvested usually at the mature green stage, they are, mature, which means they can ripen on their own. But we add ethylene to ensure the ripening is uniform and to ensure that we get the same color, tomatoes in the whole load. Because if you let the fruit ripen on its own, you're going to have a lot of variability in the load. But when you apply a lot of ethylene exogenously, you have a more uniform result. So yeah, back to as you mentioned, we can apply ethylene to a number of crops, and we do that to ensure we get the visual quality and the organoleptic characteristics that we want to make sure that our consumers are happy eating these products.
What about some of the micronutrients and other parts of the nutritional profile? What happens to that for various vegetables and fruits on what timeline? Any generalities?
Many things, as I mentioned, will go down naturally. Many vitamins will eventually go down. Some others not. I don't have like a timeline. I cannot tell you, in 5 days you get 20% less vitamin C or, 40% vitamin XYZ. But in general, the trend is for most nutrients to go down as fruit ages or vegetables age. So you want to make sure you eat as fresh products as possible. But it's not only to eat fresh products. You want to eat products that have been stored at the appropriate conditions, because, storing a product at 75 degrees for a week is probably much worse than storing the same product at 32 degrees for 3 weeks. So, it's not only how old the product is, but what were the conditions for storage for this product. So it's very important to mention that what we try to do as post-harvest physiologists, we're trying to teach people on the appropriate conditions of storage for each individual product. And this way, not only we ensure, a long shelf life, but we ensure that all the nutritional characteristics of the product are, remaining at a good level for as long as possible. If that makes any sense.
Okay, no problem. So what is some of your research about?
So in my lab, I joined the University of Georgia back in the fall of 2019. We're working on different ways of ensuring fruits and vegetables from the state of Georgia and the region are stored for as long as possible. And we're trying to help our local industry reach out to new markets, possibly ship products that are a local commodity to the region or to the country, or even export products to the nearby countries. We're working with commodity commissions around the state. We're working with the Peach Commission, with the Vegetable Commission, with the Blueberry Commission, and we're looking in issues that they face and disorders that are out there that have not been identified yet. And we're trying to provide them with solutions in, these problems. To give you an example.
One example.
So the peach industry in Georgia is using a method called hydrocooling to cool down freshly harvested peaches. The peaches come from the field, they're warm, and you need to drop down the temperature as quickly as possible. So what they do is they have cold water, which is, they're like drenching those bins of peaches with cold water, and they want to also disinfect the product. So they add chlorine to this water. So we were looking, and we're still working on that, in alternative sanitation methods. We were looking in adding a gaseous or an aqueous ozone solution to this water, for example. And we're looking on the effects of this new hydrocooling system to the quality of the product. Does it harm the product quality? Does it improve the product quality compared to chlorine? And could it be a potential alternative? This is one, project that I've been working on.
What does that mean? What does that mean, quality? What's the definition of it to you or growers?
Quality is the degree of excellence that each individual throughout the value chain is expecting to have from the commodity that he or she is dealing with. So for the, farmer is the visual looks and how saleable the product is to the next step. For the consumer, on the other hand, is how it tastes, how it feels when you eat the product, how long it can last on the counter or in the fridge. Each person has a slightly different approach to quality. Shelf life is a very important part of it because everybody wants a product to last long. And then, of course, visual quality is the first thing you notice, because when you go to the store, you buy with your eye. But it's been shown from research that repeat customers demand good eating quality. So it doesn't matter if your product looks good, it has to taste good for the person to come back and buy the product again. And that's what you want. You want the repeat customer that will come back and say, oh yeah, I like this peach from Georgia. I like this, lettuce from this place. I'm going to pay the extra $1 to get that compared to the other, competitor's product. So, quality overall is very, very important. And there's many different, like quality could be visual, as I said, could be organoleptic, what you taste or what you feel, what you smell, could be nutritional quality as well. And that could be, analyzed in the lab where you can see how much of each vitamin you get when you consume this product. Is it better than the others? Is it worse? Or what can we do to improve the nutritional benefits from a product? Could we probably store it at a different temperature to make sure the vitamins stay, are there for a longer time? Could we plant a different variety that has more or less of, compound that we want or we don't want? There's a lot of things that, part of quality, and we are looking at it. It all depends on the product and, the end consumer and whatnot.
Very good. What are some of the really difficult fruits or vegetables to harvest and transport and store? Which ones have to go like really quickly and which ones can go a lot longer?
So generally, leafy greens, lettuce and the likes are the ones that have the shortest shelf life, and they require very good temperature management. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum, you have dry nuts that can last for a long time. Somewhere in between, you have, fruits like peaches and nectarines, and then you have tomatoes and you have onions that can last longer. So, if you were to talk about, to put them on a scale, usually the way we can estimate the shelf of a product is by looking at its respiration rate. Many people don't know, but, as I said, all the fruits and vegetables are alive. So they respire like we do. They consume oxygen and produce CO2. The rule of thumb is that the more a product respires, the shorter the shelf life. Let's say
the more the product what?
The more it respires, the more it consumes oxygen, the more CO2 it produces, the shorter the shelf life it gets.
How do you know if it's doing that? How do you know if it's doing that?
We can see that in the lab. We have equipment that, can measure the rate of respiration for every living organism. The way you do it, that you can seal a container with a product, and then you seal it for a set amount of time, let's say 1 hour. And then you can measure the buildup of CO2 by taking a sample of the air in that container. And then you can tell, oh yeah, my peaches aspire more than, these dry onions. And, these are things that we do routinely in the lab. And we can tell if a product has undergone some sort of stress, because believe it or not, these alive organisms will get stressed. Let's say you mishandle your product. You put your product at a really high temperature, at a very low temperature, or, there's an attack of some pathogen. The product will aspire more. It's like when you and I are like working out, we will aspire more because our body is trying to cope. That's what, the product is also trying to do. So, you get high respiration, and then you get product will consume more of its substrates, and it will usually die faster than one product of the same type that will have a low respiration. So the number
which fruits are like the heavy breathers then?
So rule of thumb, the ones that don't last long, they breathe more than the ones that do last longer. An example, a peach has a higher respiration than, an orange, because peaches last only for a few days, or bananas also respire more. And then, citrus can stay intact for quite some time.
But how could something respire after they're harvested? I guess you said they're still alive. So are they still respiring, or do they go into like a decay mode?
They still respire. and then the decay comes afterwards. You have a pathogen attack to the product, and through a wound or an opening or through a scar that might be there. And then that attack usually causes the respiration to go up even higher. And then it causes, the ultimate death of the product. So our job is to make sure that the product expire as low as possible and that they live for as long as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, the number one way of doing that is by cooling the product after harvest to the appropriate temperature and by keeping it at that low temperature for as long as possible. Because the product, if it warms up and cools down again, or if you handle it a lot, it doesn't like that. It'll get stressed out, it will respire more, and then in the end, you have a shorter shelf life.
Okay, makes sense. So, I mean, there doesn't seem to be any warnings or anything. I guess, I don't know, people that handle the fruit and, whether it's the store or the person. I mean, I don't see I guess I've never seen any warnings of any of this. Are there any guidelines, or is that not necessary, or how come?
Yeah, one of the issues that I see around both at people's homes and at retail places is that they don't use the appropriate temperature for each product. They either put the product at a very low temperature or at a very high temperature, and they do that for many different reasons. For example, very often the stores would want to showcase a product, and they do that by taking it out of the refrigerated area and they put it at a 70-degree room. Let's say you have strawberries. That strawberries should be kept down to 32 to 34 degrees Fahrenheit, no higher. But when we have a lot of strawberries coming in and the store wants to push them out as quickly as possible, they often stack them out let's say when you enter the grocery store, you see strawberries out there, you can smell them, which is great, but they're not supposed to be there. These berries have warmed, the senescence process has started and is already happening. And then what you can do is you can just take them home and put them as quickly as possible to the refrigerator. If you don't, you're going to get only a few days of shelf life. However, if the store was to keep the berries at the appropriate low temperature, and then you were to do the same thing, you will get a much longer shelf life, a much better eating quality, lower percentage of decay, and it would be a firm, glossy berry versus, a mushy, dark, dehydrated berry that you would get if you were to leave it at a 70-degree location. So this is one part of the problem. People or, stores just mishandling the product and putting it at a higher temperature. The other issue I see is many times products are stored at a very low temperature. So then you get a product that is not supposed to be stored at 34 or 40 degrees being put there because, that's the only temperature that you have. You have either 70 or 40. So you go with the lower one, thinking that it's going to extend the shelf life. But it can cause a disorder called chilling injury. And this happens in plants that are usually tropical or subtropical, like bananas, pineapples, like even tomatoes. Believe it or not, they're not supposed to be stored in the refrigerator. Very often, in order for them to extend the shelf life, they do that. But then when you take the product out of the cold room and you leave it for a few days in ambient conditions, that's when you're going to get the visible effects of chilling. And you see that we've all seen bananas, how they look when they come out of the refrigerator. They turn brown and they don't have a good eating quality anymore. In other products, you might not see the effect of chilling, but you'll be able to taste it. For example, in tomatoes, you can probably store them at the refrigerator. They'll come out and they'll look okay, and you can cut and eat them, at that moment. But the eating quality will be significantly lower. You have certain volatiles that are naturally occurring, and by putting the product, the tomatoes, in a cold room at a very low temperature, you permanently stop or you slow down the processes that produce the volatiles that give you this good eating quality of tomato that we're all looking for. So you could harm your product by either storing it at a very high temperature, compromising its shelf life, but also by storing it at a very low temperature where you compromise both the shelf life and the eating quality, if that makes sense.
But I mean, is there guidance for anyone that handles fruit based on what you know, or is it just kind of people just know because they're in the industry?
The industry has come a long way and has improved the the quality of the product that we get. There are still issues, and I get a lot of calls and emails about guidelines on where to store each particular product, at what temperature, at what relative humidity, and whatnot. There are a couple of very good websites. One of them is the UC Davis Post-Harvest Technology Center website. They have an area in their website that is called the Produce Fact Sheets, and you can go in there and you can find the majority of the products that we find in the store, and it will tell you the recommended storage temperature as well as relative humidity. So even for everyday people, if they buy something that they're not familiar with, they can go in there and look at what temperature they should be using to keep the product alive for as long as possible. The industry, as I said, has done a lot of research, and many things we have figured them out the hard way. We had, for example, tomato quality was going down for many decades. People were complaining, and we found out that we were holding them at a very low temperature. So initially, we were holding them at 40, 45 degrees. And now we found out that even at 55 degrees, the quality of the flavor of the tomato can be harmed. So we found out that, you don't want to chill your tomatoes too low, even if you get a longer shelf life, because you lose on the eating quality side of the equation. So, many things are still, yet to be identified. What is the optimum temperature, or, what is the temperature for each individual variety? But we've come a long way, and the industry has improved a lot. That's why we get more fruit, like a larger selection of fruit year round. It's because, we've done a lot of research throughout the decades, and we can capitalize on these, like low temperature storage facilities, bringing products from, the Southern Hemisphere during our winter and vice versa. So, we have come a long ways, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Okay, understood. So, Angelos, what's the best way for people to find out more about your work? Where can they go?
If you don't know, I have a heavy extension appointment, which means that I work with the industry of Georgia and the United States in general in order to provide solutions to their problems. So if there is an immediate and urgent need for something, they can reach out to me. They can look me up on the UGA website. They can reach out to me via phone or email. We also have something called extension publications coming out, and these come depending on the season and the product we're working on. We are putting out information that are for the industry or for everyday people that want to learn how to store their product longer. We put them out in the UGA websites. There are ways that you can Google the commodity of interest, and you can look for, the UGA websites and what we have out there for, let's say, strawberry. And you can look for a production manual, a storage manual, shipping manual, and, it's a shorter science-based document that everybody can use. It's not like too complicated. We're trying to make it easily accessible and understandable for the average person out there. But also we make sure that what we're suggesting is scientific and, is not something that came up to our mind one day without, doing any background research. So you have to make sure what you trust. There are a lot of, like videos out there that will show you ways to extend the shelf life of your banana and make it last for 6 months. Most of them are not science-based. So if you are looking for good quality information, go to your state university where, science-based research is done and look for, this. And if you have a question and you work on a commodity, don't be afraid to reach out to your local scientists. They're there for that reason. Reach out, call them, email them, and you're gonna get answers to your question, and it's gonna save you a lot of time and probably money if you are, a professional. So, other than that,
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's about all we have time for, Angelos. But thank you so much for coming, and I appreciate all your advice and wisdom about the vegetables and fruits. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me know if you need anything else on my end. I'll be happy to, send you if you have any questions or things that you need to put on the website or where.
Before you stop listening, ask yourself, what are 1 or 2 useful things you heard on this podcast that can help you overcome food and fertilizer shortages, skyrocketing prices, the cost of living, or your job being outsourced overseas or eliminated due to automation? Please like and subscribe and tell your friends and family about their Surviving Hard Times podcast. We're all going to need help now and in the near future.